Those of you who I haven't met, which is I think most of you from what I'm seeing on the screen, I was an '06 Marshall. I came from Chicago and went to Bristol for a couple of years with my scholarship. And that's where I met my wife, Anne, and started eventually our journey to different places that brought us back to the UK. So I'm on the faculty of the University of Edinburgh now, and I teach geology and paleontology. And I don't know if we have, I think Jessica's on here as an '06, or I don't know, maybe we have some others, but just a big hello to everybody. And for any of the current scholars, I don't know if any of the Edinburgh scholars are here. If any of you are here, I apologize for not doing the lab tour that I promised. That was right around the time Anthony was born. He came a couple months early. So if things open up again, I'm very much happy to show anybody here our dinosaur lab down at the Grant Institute. So I am a paleontologist. I study dinosaurs. And I travel around, dig up dinosaurs, run a lab, advise students, teach courses. I've written some books for kids, and a pop science book for adults a couple years ago called The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, which was a lot of fun. I do this talk when I go around and try to sell books and all that. I'm not going to do it here. Nobody wants to hear a long talk, but I want to show you a couple of pictures just to set the story and then really open it up for questions. Anything any of you guys want to know about dinosaurs. This picture here, this is some artwork of the sort of animal that dinosaurs evolved from. This thing is essentially the ancestor of dinosaurs. It lived about 250 million years ago, and it was just about the size of a house cat. So it only would have weighed a few pounds. You could have held this thing in your arms. It looked nothing like a T-Rex, nothing like a Brontosaurus, but all human empires start somewhere, and all evolutionary empires start somewhere too. And this was the humble start of the dinosaurs. And these were very rare animals. They were living after a huge mass extinction, actually the biggest extinction that ever happened, when about 95% of all species died out at what we call the end Permian extinction. And this cleared the earth, essentially. It was an extinction, by the way, caused by big volcanic eruptions that spewed a lot of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. So it was a mega global warming event, one of the biggest in the history of the Earth, and one that actually was much slower than the warming that's going on today, which is a little bit worrying, or quite a bit worrying maybe. But the Earth did survive. The Earth got through it, and afterwards there was this wide open playing field, essentially, for new plants and animals and ecosystems to emerge. And that's where dinosaurs came from, through these kind of animals. Now, for the first 50 million years or so of their evolution, dinosaurs were actually eclipsed by early relatives of crocodiles, by giant salamanders, by all sorts of other things that were also thriving, spreading around after this mass extinction. They were living on a supercontinent. This was the time of Pangea. All the land was gathered together like this. This is what the world looked like. And so this was the setting that all of these animals, and particularly the early dinosaurs, were evolving on. Now, that's interesting for a lot of different reasons. Of course, it was a world very different from today, but it also is part of the story of how dinosaurs took over, because about 200 million years ago, that supercontinent started to break apart. And of course it did. Otherwise we wouldn't have individual continents today. So this is why we have North America, South America, Africa, so on today, because the supercontinent broke apart. Now, it started to break apart, as you can see here, basically by unzipping down the middle. And North America separated from Europe, and South America separated from Africa, and the Atlantic Ocean came in to fill that gap. That's why we have an Atlantic Ocean today. But before the water came in, as the land cracked apart, there were a lot of volcanoes that erupted. And this was another time of massive, monstrous volcanic eruptions, of lots of carbon dioxide put into the atmosphere. It was another global warming event. This one took about 600,000 years. And there was another big extinction. And so a lot of those early competitors of dinosaurs died out in this extinction, but dinosaurs were the survivors. And we don't actually know why. There are different ideas out there. Some people think dinosaurs grew faster, they could run better. They had a higher metabolism. They could eat different foods. Maybe they could keep themselves warm. Lots of different ideas. It's also possible they were just kind of lucky that this was a time of chaos and they're the ones that got through. But there's an answer out there, and I always tell the younger generations, my own students I tell, but also whenever I talk to kids, I say realistically, honestly, this is one of the biggest mysteries about dinosaurs that's still out there. We've learned a lot about dinosaurs, but there's still a lot of things we don't know, and this is, to me, the big one. Why were they the survivors at this terrible extinction when so many other things died? We don't know the answer yet, but what we do know is that after that extinction, the world changed again. And with their competitors gone, essentially, the dinosaurs had a new world again to conquer. And this time they really did. And they started to spread all around the world in the Jurassic period, the period after the extinction, called the Jurassic period. This is where Jurassic Park comes from. There's a reason they call it Jurassic Park, because this was the time that dinosaurs really started to thrive. The first 50 million years of dinosaurs, they were mostly small, like those ones we saw earlier. There were not many of them. They were being outcompeted by other animals, but now in the Jurassic, the dinosaurs take over and some of them get really big. You start to get meat-eating dinosaurs the size of buses. You start to get these long-necked dinosaurs, which are plant eaters, that are much, much bigger. Some of these things got up to the size of jet airplanes. If we remember what jet airplanes were like back in the days we could travel, imagine, these big long-necked dinosaurs, some of these things were the size of like an EasyJet plane, which is crazy. This was an actual animal, that had to hatch from an egg and grow up and live and move and feed. Incredible. And then there were other dinosaurs that evolved horns and plates and spikes and frills and all kinds of things. And this was happening in the Jurassic period. Now, what I want to draw attention to is that we have good records of these Jurassic dinosaurs from Scotland. You might not think about it. You might not think of Scotland as the sort of place where you would find dinosaurs. It doesn't really fit the stereotype. If you see shows on TV about explorers going out to the desert and brushing sand off the dinosaur bones, and that's the image we always see. But actually, we're finding dinosaurs all over the world now. People are finding more dinosaurs than ever before. We're right in the middle of what's really a golden age of paleontology. Every year, there are about 50 new species of dinosaurs that are found. And that means about once a week, there is a new type of dinosaur that is found somewhere around the world. And it's because it is global now. It's because people are looking everywhere, and it's because a lot of people are looking, more people than ever before, especially a lot of younger people, and especially in places like China, Brazil, Argentina, in these enormous countries that have opened up so much over the last few decades, training their own generation of scientists. And the field is diversified in every way imaginable. The vast majority of my students in Edinburgh are young women now. That just was not the case until very recently. So because of how the field has opened up, this is why we're finding so many new dinosaurs, including in Scotland. Now, there's only one place up here in Scotland where there are dinosaurs, at least so far, and that's the Isle of Skye. And maybe some of you have been to Skye. This is a picture of Skye here. For me, it's one of the most dramatic places on Earth. I absolutely love going up there, even though the weather is terrible most of the time. It's windy and rainy and misty and all kinds of things. But it is a great, great, great place. For tourists, it's a great place for these movies to be filmed, and it's a great place to find dinosaurs. So, now I'm not quite sure what's going on there. I'm just going to, there's some weird animations going on. So, we go to Skye. We go to Skye pretty much every year now. And it's a place where I take my students and I train our students in doing field work and in excavating dinosaurs and digging up the bones. And this is one of our students, Moji, who's taken out some fossils there. And with the bigger bones, we have to use bigger tools. There we are, this one of our colleagues with a diamond tip saw, with a rock saw, literally cutting the dinosaur bones out of the rock. The rock is so hard, we need to cut the bones out. Now, the bones on Skye are pretty rare. We usually just find bits and pieces of them, but there are some other fossils that are even better, that are not bones, and we find these in more places on Skye, including this place. And this is a place called Duntullum, which is on the far northern tip of the Isle of Skye. And this is a picture that we took a few years ago. It's sunny out, which is miraculous. You can see just how miraculous it is that it's so sunny out. And we're taking this picture and not looking for fossils because it's high tide. You can see the tide line is just lapping up against the beach. So the rocks that we find the fossils in are there on the beach. So we have to wait till it's low tide, and that beach turns into a rock platform. It turns into a tidal platform, about 100 meters or so out to the water. Now that rock is Jurassic Age rock. And we went there because a colleague of ours found a little bone. A geologist friend of mine found a tiny little bone, and he showed it to me, and I got excited because I could tell it was the bone of a fossil Jurassic crocodile. And so we thought we'd go out there, we'd find more, and we looked all day, hands and knees, you know, and that's hard rock, you know, and it was cold, it was windy. We weren't finding anything. It was one of those days, and actually we have a lot of days like that when we're out doing field work. And so at about 7 o'clock or so at night, it was time to call it quits, and we decided to go back for the day. And as we started walking back, we noticed that there were these big holes in the rock platform, which we had kind of seen earlier, but we didn't think much of them because we were on our hands and knees looking for tiny bones. But when we stood up and started really walking across the platform, we could see that there were lots of these things, and there were hundreds of them, and each one was about the size of a car tire. And we could see there was a bit of a pattern to them. There's a bit of like a zigzag, you know, left, right type of pattern. And we could see that these things were actually impressed into the rock. So they weren't just like random erosion from the tides. These things were actually made before the rock was rock, back when it was soft sand, by something impressing downward into the rock. And some of these things, when they got filled in by other rock, we could see they had these little projections. 1, 2, 3, 4 there. And sometimes they were paired. There was a big horseshoe-shaped one with a smaller crescent-shaped one in front of it. Now, it dawned on us after a few minutes that actually these things were fossils, that we had found fossils. It hadn't been a lost day in the field, but we had found fossils, and they were dinosaur fossils, but they were not bones. They were a different type of fossil. They were footprints and handprints that were left behind by dinosaurs. And there's really only one type of dinosaur, one type of animal that's ever lived on the land that is big enough that it left a hole the size of a car tire every time its hands or feet touched the ground. And these are these long-necked dinosaurs, what we call the sauropod dinosaurs. And these are the things like Brontosaurus and Diplodocus, for those of you that know Dippy, that used to be on display at the Natural History Museum in London, and now been replaced by a whale. Dippy's touring the country, or at least it was touring the country, but that's this type of dinosaur. And these were the biggest animals that have ever lived on land. They were plant eaters. They had those tiny little heads. They would stick them way up into the tops of the trees and strip leaves and bark and eat stuff that no other dinosaurs could eat, and that's what helped them become so big. The footprints and handprints on the Isle of Skye are some of the very oldest records of giant sauropod dinosaurs that have been found anywhere in the world. So they're really interesting and they're really important, and they tell us that during this time in the Jurassic, about 170 million years ago, there were already dinosaurs getting to be the size of 3 or 4 elephants put together, with necks that could stretch 2 or 3 stories into the sky. And I think that's really cool. So we're seeing the early phases of this blossoming of dinosaurs. We're getting a record of that right here in Scotland. Now, I have a lot of students that work on these fossils. This is Paige, who came from the US to do her master's in the UK. She didn't get a Marshall Scholarship, sadly. I think she did apply. She would have been a very worthy scholar. She's an incredible young researcher, and she did a master's in Edinburgh with me. We have a program, by the way, a master's course, a paleontology specific 1-year master's course now, which is open and eligible to any Marshall scholars that want to do it in the future. And Paige was one of the first students that came and did that course. And Paige came from Nevada. She has a geology background, but also she has an engineering degree too. So she's really good at building machines and running experiments and doing that sort of real hands-on technical design work that not a lot of paleontologists have experience with. So Paige did her master's on making these drone maps of the track sites. And that was a challenging thing to do, flying these drones in the wind and in the rain. It took a lot of work, a lot of really hard work, but Paige came up with these incredibly detailed maps. And we have several track sites from Sky now. The ones with these sauropods were just one site. We have tracks of meat-eating dinosaurs, early relatives of T-Rex. We have tracks made by stegosaurs, so the dinosaurs with the plates on their backs. We have tracks made by some of the early relatives of the duck-billed dinosaurs, which are another type of plant eater. And what we envisioned Sky was like during the Jurassic was a world like this. It was part of an island, like it is today, but it was a slightly differently shaped island. It was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but remember the Atlantic Ocean was just beginning to open up. So it wasn't a big ocean, it was just a really narrow seaway. And you had mountains on the middle of this island. They were being drained by rivers, by fierce rivers, big rivers, the size of Mississippi River. And as those rivers then emptied into the ocean, there were beaches and there were lagoons all around the shore. And the dinosaurs were living on the land, but also in the lagoons. And some of them, including those long-necked dinosaurs, were making their footprints and handprints as they were wading in the shallow water, which is, I think, just an incredible image to think about. And this image that's on the screen was done by an artist who's based here in Scotland named John Hode. And it shows some dinosaurs going out into the lagoon to find food after a storm. We know there were very fierce storms because we see the evidence in the rocks. So the fossils are found in the rocks tell us the environment. They tell us it was a lagoon, and they tell us there were some big storms. So I think you can put yourself back there, 170 million years ago, the ancient Isle of Skye, much hotter than it is today, much nicer weather, subtropical, kind of like parts of Florida today. And you have these giant dinosaurs wading through the lagoons on the search for food, while you had other dinosaurs like this little meat eater in the foreground there that were eyeing them up. And so that's what it was like here so long ago. And I could obviously keep going on with lots of slides, but I want to just give a couple of more information on a couple of more interesting dinosaurs. So the Jurassic period unfolded. Dinosaurs became dominant. They grew to huge sizes. They spread around the world. We start finding their fossils everywhere, even in Scotland. And then the Jurassic period turned into the Cretaceous period. And the Cretaceous period is when T-Rex lived. Now, T-Rex is, I think, the most famous dinosaur. I think everybody in the world knows what T-Rex is. It deserves all of its accolades, by the way. It was the biggest meat eater, pure meat eater, that has ever lived on land in the entire history of the Earth that we know of. It was the size of a double-decker bus. That's true if you've heard that factoid before. That's absolutely true. It was about 40 feet or so long, 13 meters. It weighed 7 or 8 tons as an adult. It could bite so hard with those big banana-sized teeth that it would crush through the bones of its prey, which is crazy. And we know that. We find the shattered bones of things like Triceratops that it ate. Now, T-Rex lived only in North America, and T-Rex is the culmination of this group of meat-eating dinosaurs becoming bigger and bigger and bigger over time. But there was another group of meat-eating dinosaurs that did the opposite. And over the Jurassic and the Cretaceous times, they got smaller and smaller and smaller. And these were the raptor dinosaurs. And this is Velociraptor here. And maybe some of you, Velociraptor might be your favorite dinosaur. And if so, that's a cool dinosaur to have as your favorite. It's also a very famous dinosaur, just like T-Rex, thanks to Jurassic Park. But as much as I love Jurassic Park, and as much as I have to toe the company line now, as I'm the science advisor for the franchise now, which was supposed to be filming right now, by the way. I was supposed to be hanging out with Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard and Jeff Goldblum instead of all you lovely people, but that'll go on. But as much as I love Jurassic Park and think the franchise is so important, such a great thing for paleontology, it got so many people interested in dinosaurs. One thing that the film has consistently gotten wrong is the velociraptors. This on the screen here is what real velociraptors would have looked like. They were just about the size of a miniature poodle, so you could hold them in your arms, but that would not be advisable because they had those enormous claws on their feet. They would rip you open almost immediately. But as you can see here, the way this thing looks is nothing like it looks in the film. This is a dinosaur that's covered in feathers. It even has things that look like wings. It is not a green, scaly, crocodile-looking animal. This thing really looks like a bird. And this is not just guesswork. This is reality. This is what the real velociraptor would have looked like. We don't know the exact colors for velociraptor, although we do know the colors of some other dinosaurs. But we know it had feathers, and we know it even had wings. And we know that because of these amazing fossils from China. And these were fossils that were discovered for the first time only in the 1990s. And they were fossils that I first got a chance to look at when I was a Marshall Scholar. I went to China and did a research trip during one of the summers that I was in Bristol, and it really just opened up my world, my scientific world, to all kinds of new fossils and new people. The fossils from China are vast, and China is the main reason why there are so many new dinosaur discoveries these days. Probably about half of all new dinosaurs come from China. And there are so many important ones, but the most important ones, I think, are these feathered dinosaurs, the ones that were first discovered in the late 90s. They were discovered after Jurassic Park came out. So Steven Spielberg and that crew, they had no idea that dinosaurs had feathers. These fossils a few years later proved it. And these animals on the screen here, these are all raptor dinosaurs. These are all close cousins of Velociraptor. They all are covered in feathers, and you can see some of them even have wings. And we know from Velociraptor fossils too, actual real fossils of Velociraptor, that they had feathers and they had wings. And I think that's incredible. Now this is one here that was on the last slide, but this is one that I described a few years ago, and we named it as a new species. It's called Zhenwan Long. It's named after a Chinese man who runs a museum who secured the fossil. It was actually discovered by farmers. Most of these great fossils in China of the feathered dinosaurs are found by farmers out working their fields. And in fact, a lot of dinosaurs and other fossils are found by farmers, construction workers, hikers. It's not the scientists that are always finding these things. It's not the professors. It's not the people with PhDs. And that's always, I think, just a cool thing to realize, that anybody can find a fossil. You know, it's such an accessible science, paleontology. And this is a great example. A farmer working his fields found this fossil. And this is a raptor dinosaur. It is one of the closest cousins of Velociraptor. You can see its whole body is covered in feathers. There's feathers on its tail, there's feathers on its torso, feathers around its head, and these are wings. That is a wing, and that is a wing. This is a raptor dinosaur with wings, and it would have looked something like this. It is because of these fossils that we know that birds evolved from dinosaurs. It is not a matter of debate. It was a matter of debate for many decades, but when the feathered dinosaur fossils showed up, that sealed the deal. Birds evolved from dinosaurs, and that means, in a biological sense, they are dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs. Today's birds are dinosaurs. They're dinosaurs in the exact same way a T-Rex is or a Brontosaurus is. They are part of the dinosaur family tree. And yes, they look different from other dinosaurs, but you know, we all have cousins that look different from us. It doesn't mean they're not our cousins, and it doesn't mean they're not in our family. And that, I think that's incredible, because it means that dinosaurs still live on today. And it was from these kind of raptor dinosaurs like Zhenwan Long that the first birds evolved. These are the immediate ancestors of birds. And I just think that's amazing. So there are something like 10 to 14,000 species of birds that live today. Those are living dinosaurs. the pigeons out here, the seagulls, the crows, the magpies, all those things are dinosaurs. And that's amazing. I think that's incredible. And there are only about 6,000 species of mammals that are alive today. So really, there are still more dinosaurs than there are mammals. Now, with that being said, all the other dinosaurs died out when this 6-mile wide asteroid hit the Earth 66 million years ago. It hit Mexico, what's now Mexico, and in an instant, the Earth changed. This was probably the single worst day in the entire history of the Earth. And it caused earthquakes, tsunamis, tidal waves, volcanoes to erupt, all kinds of things, because the energy released from this thing was more than 1 billion nuclear bombs put together. It was catastrophic, and it reshaped the Earth. And the dinosaurs were there. T-Rex was there when the asteroid hit. These duck-billed dinosaurs were there when the asteroid hit. They were the immediate victims. And a lot of other things died too. A lot of the reptiles living in the oceans, the pterodactyls, all of those things died out. This was another mass extinction, but this one was not caused by climate change, by global warming. In this case, it was caused by that asteroid. But some things did survive. And so a big focus of my work now is actually turning away from the dinosaurs and taking the story forward and saying, okay, when the non-bird dinosaurs died, because we have to remember birds are dinosaurs, so some dinosaurs lived, but when the T-Rexes and Brontosauruses and all those things died, what happened? And what happened was new groups of animals came in to take their place. And some of the best fossils of these new animals are found in New Mexico. And so I spend a lot of time there, and I take my students out there. This is a big project we have funded by the European Union, which thankfully will continue, but future researchers here in the UK, it's going to be really, really tricky to get these kind of grants, sadly. But I have, 3 students, a postdoc, funded in this European project, and we're spending time in New Mexico and other places collecting fossils. Here's Sarah, one of my students, working with Tom, who's one of my colleagues in the US, and we find a lot of these kind of fossils in New Mexico, in the rocks, just after the dinosaurs went extinct. So we have lots of dinosaur fossils in New Mexico. There's T-Rex in New Mexico. There are long-necked dinosaurs in New Mexico, and then they disappear, and then we see rocks that mark that asteroid impact, and then in the rocks above, no more dinosaurs except for a few birds, but lots of these kind of fossils. And if these things look kind of familiar to you, that's because we have these kind of things in our own bodies. These are teeth. These are tooth fossils, and these are the teeth of mammals. They are teeth that look a lot like our teeth. They have all these cusps and crests and ridges on them. Those are very unusual teeth. A dinosaur wouldn't have these teeth. T-Rex had steak knife teeth. The plant-eating dinosaurs had little peg-shaped teeth. These are the complex teeth of mammals. And so it's the mammals that took over from the dinosaurs. And within a few million years of the asteroid, in New Mexico, we have these kind of mammals, these small little things, scurrying around on the ground, climbing trees, using their opposable thumbs to grip the branches. And these are the very, very first primates. So these things are our ancestors. And that goes to show that really one of the only reasons we're here is because the dinosaurs died. If that asteroid did not hit, if it was a near miss, and T-Rex and Brontosaurus and so on, those kind of dinosaurs persisted, the mammals probably would have never gotten their opportunity, and we wouldn't have things like primates. And without primates, we wouldn't have things like humans. So we are all part of this single great evolutionary story. And for me, that's why dinosaurs are more than just cool museum exhibits or subjects of films. They are part of our story, and we can't really understand our own origins without thinking about the dinosaurs. So I will end the slides there. Hopefully that gives you enough of an outline of dinosaur evolution to start asking some good questions. So I'm happy to take any questions. Okay, so how do footprints get fossilized instead of just getting washed away? That's a very good question. Very good question. So, I mean, if we're walking along a beach, we might leave footprints in the sand, and they're probably going to be swept away by the next wave. That's what happens to most footprints. And it makes sense, really, because when you think about it, each animal, whether it's a person or a dinosaur, has only one skeleton. So if you're going to leave a fossil bone or tooth, that's quite challenging. But conceivably, we could make millions of footprints in our lives. But you don't find millions of footprints as fossils. They're actually quite rare. So you need very specific ways of preservation to get footprints preserved. And basically what usually happens is footprints are made in mud or sand that might be a little bit wet, but then it dries out and that hardens the footprint in, and then some other sand or mud comes over and covers it, and that's what sets it in as a fossil. And so it sounds like a long shot. It is a long shot. It's like a 1 in a million type thing, maybe even worse odds. But given millions of years of Earth history and millions of footprints made by each dinosaur over its lifetime, it's with those odds that we occasionally find some footprints. So which dinosaur does a duck come from? Hey, that's a good question. So ducks are some of the most primitive or kind of simplest or earliest, evolving of the modern birds. And there's actually duck ancestors in Cretaceous rocks of the same age as T-Rex. So there's fossils from Antarctica and from Europe. Now, there was one that was described last month. It was called the Wonder Chicken, was this nickname. It was a friend of mine who's also he's a Canadian guy, but he's on the faculty at Cambridge now, and he described this thing. And it's a little skull of a duck ancestor back in the Cretaceous period, which is really neat. My favorite dinosaur museum. That's a tough question. There's a few museums I'll mention. So when I was growing up in Northern Illinois, it was the Field Museum in Chicago and a small museum in Rockford, Illinois called the Burpee Museum. Those were the two that I would always drag my parents to, and they were the ones that I started working at. And especially with the Burpee Museum, I started to go out and do field work with them. So those ones are very special, and they both have great dinosaur collections. I did my PhD in New York, and so I did it in a Columbia program affiliated with the American Museum of Natural History. And that is by far the biggest and best collection of dinosaur bones anywhere in the world. And what's on display is only a tiny fraction of what's back in the storehouse. And so I think, that's the ultimate museum. But in Europe, there's some great museums too. The Natural History Museum in London is excellent. They also have not only very nice exhibits, but also big collections. And they have some very cool dinosaurs. They have Sophie the Stegosaurus on display, which is an exhibit that's only a few years old, and that actually comes from the Western U.S. Those bones, but they were bought by the museum. And there's so many other great museums around the world. So really, almost any country you can find dinosaurs somewhere. How do we know the colors of some dinosaurs? If we have feathers preserved, like we do in China. And by the way, I should say the reason those feathers are preserved is, again, a 1 in a billion fluke accident of geology. Those dinosaurs were buried by volcanic eruptions, by ash and by sludge from volcanoes, Pompeii style, essentially. So they were buried quickly, just going about their everyday business. They had no time to decay. There was no time for scavengers to eat them, so the feathers were locked in as fossils. And if those feathers are really well preserved, we can put them under scanning electron microscopes, and we can see these little bubbles that are called melanosomes. And these are the cells that keep pigment inside of them. So pigment is what gives the dinosaur feathers color. And we know from modern birds that different colors are held by melanosomes of different sizes and shapes. So all we have to do is look at the size and shapes of those dinosaur melanosomes, and we can say this dinosaur was black, this one was brown, this one was ginger, this one was iridescent, like shiny colored like a crow, this one had stripes, this one had a camouflage pattern. And that was discovered about a decade ago by a PhD student in the US, a great example of how a lot of the most fascinating insights come from students these days. Okay, let's see. So yeah, assume only a small fraction of dinosaurs get fossilized when they died. So how do we have a good idea of how numerous dinosaurs actually were? Yeah, the fossil record is stingy and it's biased, and only a tiny fraction of everything that's ever lived will ever turn into a fossil. To become a fossil, you need to either get a bone or a tooth or a skeleton encased in sand or mud and turn to rock, or you have to do things like leave a footprint in sand or mud and get that turned to rock. And that's just not going to happen very commonly. So every fossil is a rare clue. And what it does mean is that we don't have a great idea of, for instance, exactly how many dinosaur species lived. we don't have a great idea of exactly how a lot of these dinosaurs behaved, what their social structures were like, what noises they made, some of those kind of things. But we do have quite a lot of knowledge based on the fossils we have. And so we really approach it like a detective approaches a crime scene. Take the clues that you can get and you build up stories from there, and you're careful, or try to be careful, not to go beyond the evidence. I think you'll always admit, probably any detective would say, they can never know exactly what happened kind of second by second at a crime scene, but with enough evidence, enough clues, you can tell much of the story. Okay, is there a bigger meat eater than T-Rex? Ooh, now this is this is a good question. Yeah, yes and no. So there are some other meat-eating dinosaurs that were about the same size as T-Rex. They were not close relatives. So there were different groups of meat eaters that independently became big, and they all got to be about the size of buses. One of them is this thing called Carcharodontosaurus, which is from northern Africa. And this is a dinosaur that I worked on with my undergrad advisor, and that actually I described when I was a master's student. And so we announced it way back then, and I remember the press, the tabloid press in the UK picked it up as this bus-sized dinosaur, which was pretty cool as a student to see this on the tabloid pages. That's one example. There's a thing called Giganotosaurus. That's another example. But although those dinosaurs were about as big as T-Rex, none of them were quite as heavy. So they were about the same length, but they didn't weigh as much. There's another dinosaur called Spinosaurus, which is a theropod dinosaur, so it's in the same general family as T-Rex. And in fact, there's a new Spinosaurus discovery being announced today, part of its tail, which shows that it was a pretty good swimmer. So it was not really a land-living, meat-eating animal. It was something that spent a lot of time in the water and could swim around with its big tail. It was probably bigger than T-Rex. So maybe you could say, okay, Spinosaurus was the biggest meat eater, but I would say T-Rex, the biggest pure meat eater that lived on land. But I hope someday somebody finds something even bigger. Okay, so would some of the raptors have been able to fly or glide? And if not, how did feathers develop on them? So yes, so some of those things could probably fly or glide. Now, could Velociraptor? Probably not. It had wings, but if you do the math, you see that those wings are just too small to keep a dinosaur of that size up in the air. And so, in order for something to stay in the air, wings have to have a certain amount of area proportional to the size of the thing. I mean, you couldn't fly a jet airplane, a Boeing 777 with the wings the size of a little prop plane. It wouldn't work. So that raises the question of, why did some of those dinosaurs have wings if they weren't flying? And the question becomes even stranger when we see that the very earliest dinosaurs in the fossil record that have feathers have very simple feathers that basically look like hair. They're just little strands. And no way those dinosaurs could fly with those little hairy filaments. Even tyrannosaurs had those little hairy types of feathers. So what it looks like is that way back in the early history of dinosaurs, they evolved simple feathers that looked like hair, probably in order to keep themselves warm, the same reason mammals evolved hair. Then, later on, much later, some dinosaurs turned those simple feathers into much more elaborate feathers, the things that we see on birds today, and they started to form wings, but those wings were too small for flying. So maybe, those wings were brightly colored, by the way. So we think they were possibly display structures. They were like advertising billboards that stuck out of the arms of these dinosaurs as they attracted mates and scared away their rivals. And then, only later did some of those dinosaurs shrink in size enough and those billboards on their arms get big enough that the laws of physics took over, and all of a sudden those billboards could provide some lift and some thrust. And that's probably when dinosaurs started flying. Okay, let's see. Is it possible to genetically reverse engineer a dinosaur from modern birds? Yes, this is something that people are talking a lot about. There's a very famous paleontologist named Jack Horner, who was the original Jurassic Park consultant. and he's trying to do this dino chicken is what he calls it. He's trying to, in his, him and his colleagues in their genetics labs, trying to basically mutate a modern chicken to make it grow teeth and grow a long tail and grow big claws so that it looks like a velociraptor. That'll probably happen at some point. Whether it should or shouldn't, I'll leave the ethics, to another discussion. But the fact that it possibly can happen is all because modern birds actually retain a lot of genes from their dinosaur ancestors. You can make a bird grow teeth, sharp teeth like a raptor in the lab. You can make birds grow longer tails. So they have this genetic legacy from their dinosaur ancestors. And so I probably sometime in the next decade will wake up to the news of some mad scientist somewhere, walking out on stage and unveiling this dino chicken on a leash. And you'll say, I remember when we were having that chat on Zoom during the pandemic and Steve said it was going to happen. And so I think it will. But it won't be me that does it. Okay, so you want to know how many dinosaurs were there on Earth at any one time? That's a great question. And I don't know the answer because the fossils are so limited. But if we look at the world around us today, there are 10,000 plus species of birds, and those are living dinosaurs, and there are billions of individual birds. And so probably at any given time in the Jurassic and Cretaceous period, there were probably thousands of dinosaur species, and those had many thousands, millions, or even billions of individuals. So there were probably tons of dinosaurs living all over the world. And if you want to know a really cool fact, I think it's true. I've seen it quoted multiple times, and I think it's true. The most abundant animal, well, at least abundant vertebrate animal with bones on the planet today is a dinosaur, and that's chickens. I think there are more chickens than any other animal with bones on the planet today because we, keep them for food and for eggs and so on. So even today, there are billions and billions and billions of dinosaurs. Okay, so Josh's question, your daughter wants to know if we understand why dinosaurs evolved from being mostly smaller species into some that were so large. Great question. As we saw, those first dinosaurs were very humble. You would never guess, looking at those things, that they eventually would evolve into things like T-Rexes or these airplane-sized Brontosaurus type dinosaurs. There is so much debate about why dinosaurs were able to get so big and why, say, modern mammals have not been able to get so big, except for whales, but they live in the water, and so the water is a different world. There's buoyancy, gravity doesn't have the same effect, so things can get bigger in the water. But there's no mammals on land that have ever lived that are anywhere near the size of the biggest dinosaurs. It's probably not just one reason. There's probably a combination of things that dinosaurs had that allowed them to get really big. The long neck is one of those things. They could reach high up into the trees where no other dinosaurs could, so they could eat all day long. I mean, they had a never-ending buffet of food. But they also had very efficient lungs. They had the same lungs that birds have today. We know that because those lungs leave certain marks on the bones, very distinctive marks. Now, the lungs of birds are much more efficient than the lungs of mammals. They take in basically double the amount of oxygen. And they also have these air sacs that stick out from the lungs. They're like balloons that fill with air that can deliver extra oxygen to the lungs. And those air sacs make the skeleton lighter. They actually go into the bones. And that means dinosaurs, the biggest dinosaurs, had very light skeletons. They look huge and they were big, but they were limber. They could move around because of those air sacs. And so it's probably those things in combination that allowed dinosaurs to get so big. Okay, now a question about the first version of humans. I'm not an expert on human evolution, but what I can tell you, and I think I'm seeing you there. Salone, is that your name? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing, but that's a great question. You might know more than I do about it, but Homo sapiens, our species, is only about 200,000 years old. Very, very young. You think about dinosaurs living hundreds of millions of years. Our species has only been around 200,000 years. The oldest Homo sapiens are from Africa, so our species evolved in Africa. And it evolved from other types of primates that had started to walk on the ground and evolve big brains. And these are what are called hominids. And in fact, for most of the last few million years, there were many species of hominids living together. It wasn't only Homo sapiens. There were Neanderthals, and there were Denisovian humans, and there's Homo erectus, and all these other species. So we actually had a lot of close cousins that would have looked like us. They probably, some of these, could talk. They probably had art. They probably had culture. But now only Homo sapiens survived. But I'm not an expert on this stuff, so I should probably stop it there before I say anything silly. Okay, let's see. My theory for how dinosaurs survived those volcanoes. You know what? I genuinely don't know. I don't know. I think it was probably a hand of cards scenario. It probably wasn't one reason. It probably wasn't because they had one superpower or something like that. It's probably because at the time those volcanoes erupted, dinosaurs were holding a good hand of cards. They were smaller at that time. They were adaptable. They could grow fast. They were potentially already warm-blooded. Maybe they already had feathers that could help shield them from temperature spikes and so on. So maybe those things all combined together. And there probably was a good dose of luck too, because whenever there's a mass extinction, this is a sudden period of time where the normal rules of ecology and evolution break down. The sort of things that make an animal successful during normal times might actually hinder them during a time when the earth gets really hot or an asteroid hits or volcanoes erupt. So it looks like dinosaurs were probably fortunate that maybe they had the right hand of cards, but I know that's a vague answer, and I really don't know. So it is something that the next generation of paleontologists is going to have to figure out. Any idea why raptors first evolved feathers for flying? I think I answered that, probably for insulation and then display. The tallest and largest sauropod, yes, Argentinosaurus. There's a couple other ones from South America. There's one called Patagotitan, and these things were all kind of the same size, and they were massive. These things were like 80, 90 tons in mass. They were something like, 100 plus feet long. Their necks could stretch up several stories. They were huge dinosaurs. Let's see. Is there a dinosaur genome project that exists? No, there's not. There's no real life Jurassic Park in that way. As a scientist, I hate to say that anything is impossible, but I think it is very unlikely that that'll ever happen because DNA just doesn't preserve for a long time. DNA starts to break down really quickly once something dies. And to get DNA preserved for tens or hundreds of millions of years, every paleontologist in the world wants to find dinosaur DNA. I think we all know we would become instantly famous if we found dinosaur DNA. Nobody has ever found even a single base pair, and that speaks to how rare it is. Issues of private discovery, claims, ownership in the dinosaur world, yeah, lots. Every country has different laws. In the US, it's a landowner's rights country. And so if you own the land, you can do what you want with the fossils on it. Other countries like China, for instance, have more central government control. And that means that in some places, China, Mongolia particularly, there's a big black market when it comes to fossils, which is really sad. So a lot of dinosaurs you see up for auction, it turns out a lot of those things are actually illegal. And there have been some auctions that have been stopped. My favorite children's book about dinosaurs, there are some good ones. I've written some. I won't say my own or my favorite because I think like most writers, I look at my own stuff and I say, oh man, that's not very good. I should have done better. But there's a few really good ones out there now. Really anything National Geographic puts out is good. There's a colleague of mine called Tom Holtz who's written the Dinosaur Encyclopedia for Kids. That's a really good one. And there's a really fun new book called She Found Fossils that a few friends of mine actually published themselves, but it's all about the great female colleagues we have in the field, including many young women that have found incredible fossils. So those are all really good books to check out. Which dinosaur is the fastest runner and how fast could it run? Probably things like Velociraptor. People study this building computer models of dinosaurs, doing laser scans, surface scans of dinosaur skeletons, inputting them into animation software, putting on bones and muscles and skin, and then putting these digital models through lots of different gymnastics routines. And so things like Velociraptor were probably the fastest, but it's really hard to know for sure, really hard to know for sure. Things like T-Rex were not particularly fast. One thing T-Rex could not do was run really fast. And in Jurassic Park, when it's running down that Jeep, that would not have happened. Once you got past about 10 or 15 miles an hour, you would easily get away from the T-Rex. And let's see, what was fat storage like in small to medium dinosaurs? Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I think a lot of the artwork you see of dinosaurs is probably a bit too shrink wrapped. You know, they're shown to be a little bit too kind of muscular in that svelte, muscular kind of way. Most dinosaurs probably would have been a bit thicker, like, say, you know, many mammals are today. But beyond that, that's a really tricky one to ask because we just don't normally find, you know, fat preserved as fossils. We normally just have the bones, and we have to judge from the bones where the muscles attach and how big the muscles were, and so on. Why did birds survive the extinction? Yeah, a lot of research on this one, and it is a big question. You know, why are birds the only dinosaurs that survived the asteroid? No T-Rexes, no Brontosauruses, none of those things. Again, it was probably a hand of cards scenario. All the bigger animals died, so birds are smaller. So many of the animals that ate plants or were part of food chains based on plants died. But many birds of the time, they did kind of eat plants, but they ate seeds. And seeds are things that can survive for a long time in the soil. So they might have had food when the ecosystems were collapsing. And they probably grew fast. Modern birds grow really fast, so that probably helped them. So probably all of those things combined together to make birds the only survivors of the dinosaurs. And how did I decide to study dinosaurs? It was when I was in high school in northern Illinois, which is a place where there are no dinosaurs. Nobody's ever found a dinosaur in Illinois, but we had those great museums I mentioned, Field Museum, Burpee Museum. But it was really my brother, my youngest brother, Chris, who was a dinosaur obsessed kid, and his bedroom was a dinosaur museum. He watched Jurassic Park constantly. He was just always going on about dinosaurs. And it was through him that it finally wore me down and I became into dinosaurs. Of course, like most kids that love dinosaurs, Chris went on to do other things, and he went into the museum studies world and, you know, designed museum exhibits. Let's see, how many bird dino species would have there been that survived the extinction? Good question. The fossil record of that time is limited. It's very hard to find the bones of birds because bone birds are so fragile. They're so thin. They break really easily. So we don't know, but it was probably, we can kind of predict based on modern birds, looking at their DNA, building a family tree, tracing that family tree back in time. And we can use that to predict the number of species that would have survived the extinction. And it was probably a pretty small number. I mean, we're talking about maybe even just a few dozen around the world, which when you think about it is nothing at all. What was the vegetation like back then? Was it similar to today, or were plants also larger? So this is cool. So when the first dinosaurs were living on Pangaea, those first dinosaurs, they would have never seen a flower. They would have never seen a fruit, at least a normal kind of fruit that we're used to. And that's because there were no flowering plants back then, what we call the angiosperm plants. Brontosaurus, Diplodocus, those big long-necked dinosaurs of the Jurassic period, they would have never seen a flower. It was only in the Cretaceous, kind of during the time of T-Rex, that flowers evolved and fruits evolved. And from those flowering plants came all kinds of new trees, palms and magnolias and oaks and so on. But for most of dinosaur history, the dinosaurs were eating ferns. They were eating evergreen trees, pine trees, those kind of things, ginkgos, cycads, those kind of plants. So the story of plant evolution has a big impact on dinosaur evolution. And those two things are really intertwined, and also on mammal evolution too. Okay, and then Theo on some of the biggest questions remaining about dinosaurs, definitely why they survived that end-Triassic extinction when the volcanoes erupted. That's a big one. I think also that question that somebody else raised about why birds survived the asteroid when other dinosaurs didn't, I think that's a big one. I think there's a lot of things about dinosaur behavior, dinosaur social lives, dinosaur intelligence that we just don't know yet, because either we don't have enough fossils or we don't have quite the right tools or the right perspective to study those things. You know, how intelligent were some dinosaurs? Did some dinosaurs use tools, for instance, like some modern birds? I think those are things that that are really, really interesting, and hopefully we can start to answer. Can we tell the lifespan of dinosaur species? Yes. If you cut open a dinosaur bone, there's rings inside, just like a tree, so you can count the rings. It tells you how old the dinosaur was when it died. And what's really amazing about that is people have done this with a lot of dinosaurs. T-Rex, never seen one with more than 30 rings. So T-Rex, the size of a bus, would have grown up from a little hatchling that would have hatched from an egg about the size of a softball or a grapefruit into something the size of a bus within 30 years, and then it died. So I would have been long dead if I was a T-Rex, and that's crazy to think about it. Even the big long-necked dinosaurs like Brontosaurus or Argentinosaurus, the size of a jet airplane, those things probably only lived for about 50 or 60 years, which is absolutely insane. Are the Saurischian or Ornithischian dinosaurs considered more basal? When did they diverge, or is the division not quite right? Yeah, that's the traditional division of the dinosaur family tree into the so-called lizard-hipped dinosaurs and the bird-hipped dinosaurs. There is some debate about that. There are some alternative family trees, but I think the weight of evidence is still on that traditional division. And those groups diverged way back in the Triassic period. They diverged at least by 230 million years ago. We have fossils of those different groups way back then, but both groups back then were small, they were humble, they were being basically overshadowed by other dinosaurs. Okay. What can we learn from dinosaurs about avoiding human extinction and about dinosaur sexes and mating behavior? Dinosaur sexes and mating behavior, we know very little. It's very hard to tell a female from a male based on bones, because that's all we have really. Now, with some animals you can do it. Physical anthropologists, forensic anthropologists are experts at doing this with humans, but with dinosaurs, we just don't do it. And it just seems like there wasn't big differences. The only way, there's only two ways you can tell, and these are very unusual things. You can tell if you have a female dinosaur if there are still eggs inside of that dinosaur when it died, and that has been found before. And also there's a strange type of bone called medullary bone, which is a bone tissue that pregnant females use to get calcium. They take calcium from their bones to shell their eggs, and that leaves a very distinctive texture of this tissue in the bones. And if you see that, you know it has to be a female that was in the process of laying eggs. Otherwise, we just can't really tell males from females, at least not yet. And as far as avoiding extinction, I think the lesson is pretty simple. Dinosaurs were around for 150 some million years, and then they died, except for birds, very quickly. But that asteroid hit and rapidly changed the climate and the environments. Dinosaurs could not keep up. All of their success could not help them. Now, we've only been around for about 200,000 years. We've gone through much less than the dinosaurs. Now, yeah, we have bigger brains than the dinosaurs. We're more intelligent. We have our culture and our societies and so on. But that won't necessarily insulate us if climates and environments change so quickly that, biologically we can't keep up. So I don't mean to be a doomsayer, but I think the lesson of dinosaurs is that even the most dominant, successful, long-living animals, they can be victims when the Earth changes really quickly.